course, you could always be cranking up plugins like Fresh Air and just adding a bunch of high frequencies, but you need to realize that adding something to your master is always a compromise. And I talked to my teacher about this, and he told me that you have to be in the right mindset for mixing. And the first mindset you want to have is that everything you do is basically adjusting a fader. So when you're EQing, you're technically moving the fader up or down. So you have to imagine your EQ as a large mixing console with 20k faders. And for every frequency, you get one fader. And even when you're panning something to the left, you're lowering the volume on the right. And the second mindset you want to have is that if you want to make good music, you want to put in a lot of work, which means you also have to spend time on smaller details. So now let's jump into FL and have a look at the loop that I've made. This loop is completely unmixed. All of the faders are on Unity, no plugins, no panning, nothing. I always start by adjusting the faders, and there's no right way to do it. All you want to do is to adjust the faders until it sounds good to you. And if you're struggling with adjusting the volume, you want to go to that point where it's way too loud and this is way too low. So I'm going to try to find something in between. Yeah. Perfect. Of course, you can always adjust the levels afterwards, but you kind of want to get that rough mix in it. Always add an EQ with a low cut to all of the sounds, except if it's a bass. Sometimes I also like to remove some of the resonance points. So you want to be sweeping until you find that frequency that kind of sounds muddy. And I just turn it down and remove it. These muddy frequencies are often between 250 Hz and let's say 500, maybe even 750 Hz. So in that kind of area you want to be looking for resonance points, but of course it can be higher up as well, but they tend to sound quite boxy in that middle register. After adding EQs, I sometimes like to add a compressor. And when you're adding a plugin, you want to be careful that it's not making everything louder. When something is loud, it tends to sound better, even though it might not be better. So you always want to be turning the plugin on and off. Keep in mind that the order of the plugin matters. So if you're changing something on your EQ, it's going to affect your compressor. For example, if you remove that low cut, you're going to have more signal going into the compressor, which means the compressor will be working differently. Pretty much want to experiment with the order of the plugins, so you might prefer to have your EQ in front of your compressor or vice versa. There's no correct way to do it as long as it sounds good. This time we even made a bus instead of just having it on the channel, and there's a reason for it, and I'm going to be showing you why. Keep in mind that if you're doing it with a bus, you want to have your reverb at 100% wet. This is your dry signal, this is your wet signal, and this is where you dial in the amount. One advantage of having a bus channel is that you can add a bunch of plugins onto your reverb without affecting the dry signal. And sometimes I like to add plugins like Shaperbox because this makes it a lot easier to get a clean sounding mix by ducking sounds. I'm also gonna add this Fin Micro. This has more to do with creative mixing rather than technical mixing. And the reason why I didn't add the reverb and delay onto the channel directly is because of something my teacher told me, that you should be looking at reverb and delay as an instrument. So now I'm just going to bounce it out, which will allow me to lower the volume, to automate it, or to cut and remove certain stuff that I don't want. Option R is a shortcut to render out these mixer channels. And now this is where it allows me to add all of these details I was talking about. Reverb sounds amazing, but you only wanted to fill in these gaps. I'm just going to be removing the reverb at the beginning because I want the chords to hit on the beats, and afterwards I want to have that reverb to fill in the gaps, but I don't want it at the same time. I just want to make sure to cut off the reverb before the next chord hits, because if you don't do that, you're going to have the reverb tail going into the next chord. You're also going to have the harmonic content of that chord going to the next. So for example, if you're playing a C major chord going to a E minor chord, you're gonna have that C major reverb going into a E minor chord, which will make it sound off pitch. And by holding Option, it allows me to work off grid. Of course, if you want, you could also be automating it, and you can also edit your instruments. But right now I'm just gonna consolidate everything, pitch it down by a couple semitones. And then on a master, if you want, you can still add a bunch of stuff like I did, an EQ low cut, solid bus compressor, multiband compressor, kind of boosting some of the higher frequencies and removing some of the lower frequencies, SSL stereo channel, and finally a limiter. Before comparing these two mixes, I just want to let you know that mixing is only one side of the coin, and if you want to make fire loops, you want to improve your composition, because composition is also key. So you definitely want to watch that video. It will help you do just that. And now let's compare these two mixes.